I really wanted to talk about this topic because it's been a part of my life for a good part of my experience. And it's, how do we really grow organizations? I mean, most of us realize that we have a big vision for what it is that we want to see done in the lives of our organizations that we share together. And I think we all have a desire to see things happen. And yet sometimes we realize that we don't have all the resources that we need in order to be able to get done what it is that needs to get done. And I've found that in the course of my career that it's important to be able to engage others, because to the degree that we engage others in the support of what it is that we're doing, we're growing a network of people who really know and love and understand what it is that we really are all about. So the context of volunteerism, as I'm talking about it today, is how do we grow an organization through volunteerism? Because I really do think it's a significant, very important part of what it is that we need to do if we're really going to have viable, successful organizations that really are becoming partners with us in fulfilling what it is that we feel God's called us to do. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the work of development in this next slide. And we'll talk a little bit about them in regards to relationships, because development is all about relationships. And you've heard me say it before, and it certainly deserves to be able to speak again to this particular issue, because development is not necessarily raising money. And I think that's one of the things that I've always been deeply concerned about, because I didn't feel like fundraising as a priority was the part of my desire not to become involved in. In other words, sometimes I meet with people and they say, "Hey, my name's, who are you?" And they say, "Well, my name's Jerry Twombly." And sometimes people will say, "Oh, you're a fundraiser." And that's really kind of a bummer because they're saying, well, yeah, I think, we've had the opportunity of being able to really support an awful lot of organizations, well over $1 billion over the course of the last 52 years. But I've never seen myself as being a fundraiser. I really wanted to make sure that we were doing building what it is that I thought was really going to be essential if we were really going to have sustainable ministries in the ways that we're going to be talking about them now. So you've heard me again earlier to the definition of development. And we say that development represents those things we do to build rational relationships with others. And so it's all about relationships. It has very little to do with anything else. We really are needing, and if our organizations are going to grow, we're going to have to build relationships, and relationships not only within our organization, but beyond our organization, because the needs that you have as an organization far exceed what it is that you're capable of being able to do, just because of the inability to be able to have so many people that we feel we need in order to be able to fulfill what it is that God's called us to do. So it's all about building, rational, substantive, enduring, and committed supporters. And that's within the organization as well as beyond the organization. And I think you need to start, as we begin to talk about this whole topic, about how important it is for us to be able to engage other people, because to the degree that we can build these organizations and we can grow these organizations, we're going to grow our ministry in the kinds of ways that are going to enable us to fulfill what it is that God's called us to do. So success in all other areas of development is a consequence and never the primary focus of our work. In other words, success in fundraising is a consequence of doing a lot of things well, which includes building relationships and growing relationships. And that's obviously where we all want to go. We want to see our organizations grow and become substantively committed in very significant ways in growing an organization. Let's look at to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about the challenge of development, because I think most of us can relate to this. Most of us would agree that we don't have enough people. I have had this conversation with literally thousands of people over the course of so many years. And basically, if I'm asking them, well, what is it your need? Well, we just have to have more people. We've got to more people. We need to have more employee employees than what we can do, because otherwise we're not going to get this done. And they put that to the point. And oftentimes, one of the things that I found, and I don't know if this is true with you, as it's been true with me, but sometimes we hire somebody, and they are excited. They want to be a part of our team, and we've obviously involved a lot of people within our organization over the course of the years. But sometimes when they get a full-time salary, they feel a little bit more comfortable, in the situation. They're kind of thinking, well, this is really, really great. And they kind of lose a little bit of their excitement, not necessarily about the excitement about the organization, but they basically feel a little bit more comfortable in their role, that they don't necessarily take on the aggressive activities of entrepreneurialism, which is really a part of how we grow an organization. So one of the ways that we grow organizations is obviously to engage more people. And we can't afford most of them, or in many instances, we can't afford all the people we'd like to have. So essentially, we're going to need help from outside. One of the things, I don't know if you've heard the name Andy Stanley. Andy Stanley is a very significant, prominent pastor in the Atlanta, Georgia area. And he started an organization, from the ministry that he was involved with his own father. They started another organization, and the organization was led by Andy Stanley. What he did was, I think, really quite interesting. He started with 6 people, and then basically he created an organizational chart that had about 250 names on it, and they were all empty, and everybody was actually involved in them. But they saw the need of what was going to have to happen if they were going to grow the organization, and how it was going to be done. And they had this organizational chart that if you were to see it, at least initially, you'd say, there's nobody in the world that could do this. But the realities are, they began this whole process of knowing what we need in order to be able to what we must do if in fact we're going to fulfill the vision that God has given to us. And some of the people that they needed was not necessarily people that were serving the company, the organization, as members, although there were many of them that were basically team players. But we also had an incredible amount of volunteers that basically have enabled that organization to grow in a very, very, very significant way. If you want to learn more about that, you can look it up in the web and learn a little bit more about Andy Stanley and the ministry of his organization. A lot of people, I mean, obviously the next big issue, I hear this question an awful lot, we don't have enough money. The only thing we need, and I've heard this question, the only thing that we need is about $3 million and everything would be okay. And I'm saying that's probably the worst thing that you could do, quite frankly. I mean, it's not so that you don't need the money, but the realities are you need to have a basis and a foundation upon which you can grow a ministry, and not necessarily look to everybody that has money, but basically work to begin building people organizationally so that they can continue to grow and become a part of what it is that you're doing. And many times, as we're going to be talking about in another segment in this session, and many times, all of these people become involved in a very strategic way in the ministry, which makes the organization even more successful in what it is that's committed to doing. But consequently, we end, in many instances, doing the same thing in the same way and expecting different results. We've all heard that. I don't think it was me that thought that up, or Greg. Some people say it was Einstein that made that statement, that we do the same things in the same way and expect different results. That's absurdity. And most of us would say, yeah, that's probably true. It is absurdity. So the challenge of development is, how do we get it done in a way that basically is going to enable us to grow in the ministry that we're involved in? So let's slip down to the next one on the role of volunteers. We're going to talk more about volunteers in the next segment. And I'm going to give an illustration which is really out of the experiences that we've had that I think you'll find to be quite interesting. But let's just talk a little bit about the role of volunteers. Volunteers, as we've already intimated, is that provide invaluable support for your organization. You really need them, and you really want them. And it becomes very, very essential if you're going to grow an organization that you're going to have to use outside sources to help you to accomplish the commitments that you're making. The best volunteers are those with whom you have the closest linkage. A number of years ago, I began to come up with a bunch of rules, and I made the connection that some of those rules were really very, very important. And if I chose to change them, then I would change them. But the rule that I think is one of the most significant rule of development is the rule of linkage. And what I'm saying is the closer you're linked to someone, the greater the likelihood they're going to support you. Now, don't just pass that on as saying, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But the realities are, the linkage point is going to be, and rather than just asking just anybody to become a participant in what it is that you're doing, you may want to look for specific people with whom you have linkage, because those are the people that are most likely to listen to what you have to say. And a lot of the things that you're talking about, people, they have no interest whatsoever, or they don't know anything about your organization. And so when you communicate with them, they're not necessarily connecting in the ways that you'd like them to. But if you have people that become members of your church, or people that are really involved and excited about what it is that you're doing, and they really want to become involved, those are the people that you really want to identify and begin the process of engaging them in practical ways in which they can become involved. So the rule of linkage, and this is, I think, one of the significant rules of development, is the rule of linkage is the closer the linkage, the greater the likelihood. Now, that's not rocket science. I mean, we can figure that out by ourselves, can't we? That basically the people that we're most closely linked to are the people that are the ones that are more likely to become a part in meaningful ways and enabling us to do what it is that God's called us to do. So the final point in this particular discussion is a primary objective is to make lists. Making lists means picking a piece of paper, writing a number, a name on it, and putting it someplace where you're going to be able to maximize the potential of what that linkage or that opportunity might be for this particular individual that we're looking toward. A primary objective is to make lists of those with whom you have close linkage when seeking to engage potential volunteers. In other words, the growth of an organization is going to be predicated in a very, very meaningful way in terms of the linkage of people that would know, or people with whom we know who know. In other words, that's the way that things grow in an organization. Let me just talk about this one story, okay, and then we'll get into the issues of it. There was an organization that was involved in this in America with a Christian school. It was an incredible Christian school that was very, very large, very, very successful, was doing a lot of incredible things. They had a director who basically was incredibly smart. He really knew how to engage people and to teach them and to train them as volunteers. And he basically had a pretty good job. In fact, he was making in this particular world about $100,000 a year. And, that's just an awful lot of money, no matter where it is. But he was highly respected within the community of development. And he was asked to take another job where they were going to get $120,000, whatever the case might be. So he left the school, and basically they were trying to figure out, now what are we going to do? Because this guy who was so good and so valuable to the school had done such a great job. And so now we're left with volunteers who basically were trained by this individual and who really knew everything that they needed to know in order to be able to continue to grow the organization. So the organization basically started a recruiting exercise to try to find a replacement for the gentleman that left. And this great leader was recruited to another school, as we see it in the PowerPoint that's in front of you. He was paid a much higher salary. The school sought to find another candidate, but they couldn't find one without success. And the experienced volunteer stepped up and said, "We can do it. we can do this. I mean, we've been doing it for the last 3 or 4 years. We've been doing it very, very successfully, year after year after year after year, and it was working. And so why do we need to do this if we don't need to, if we know it already, if we have the experience already, why don't we see if we could just do this on our own? So let's turn the next slide, and it's going to tell a little bit more of the story. The we're going one back, if you don't mind, Greg. We talked a little bit about how this all happened, and they really actually could do it, and they did it extremely well. But what the organization did, now you have to remember, this guy was getting $100,000 a year, and now we have 5 or 6 volunteers that basically are on taking one aspect of what it is that was going to take place every year in the context of the ministry of the school. So they had a session, a banquet, one time of the year. They do other things during the year. And basically there was one key volunteer who basically took on the responsibility for the areas that they were working with and had been working with in the past. Well, I said, listen, and I went to the administration. I said, I think, these people have done such a great job. We might want to just give them a stipend just to express our appreciation for what it is that they're doing. And he said, well, how much do you think would be good? And I said, well, why don't you give them, just offer them $5,000 for, all the work that they're going to be doing in the context of the year to basically get this thing all done in the ways that we wanted it to take place. And so we went to each one of the individuals, and they said, we'd like to, you've done such a great job. We really appreciate all the things that you've done. We'd like to respond to you by just giving a stipend at the end of the year to let you know how much we appreciate it. They said, we don't want it. We don't want that money. I mean, that we've done this because we just love this ministry and we just really want to continue to be involved in it. I said, well, you can do that if you want. If you want to give it back, that's fine. But the realities are, we want you to know how valuable you are to us. Literally every single one of them turned the money back, because we don't want the money. We just really want the opportunity to continue to do what it is that God's been doing in the lives of our students at our school and everything. And so the realities are, we got, we saved ourselves $100,000, and basically the people were taking a much more ownership of what it is that they were doing. And the realities are, the continued story, went forward and significant with significant success. Okay, let's we can talk during the break, and that's one of the things that we're going to be doing in the next session, as we will be going to our breakout session, and you can start talking about your sessions, the issues that you've grappled with, things that may have spoken to you, at least in the context of the information that we've shared already in this particular presentation. But let's look at the broad areas of volunteerism. Where what things do we do? What can we do by using development? One thing that you could do is projects. Now, we define words in development a little bit differently, perhaps in other areas, but the realities are, projects, from my perspective, when I define what a project is something that is short-term an event. It's intended to address special needs or a crisis, and most organizations will plan maybe 3 to 4 projects annually. In other words, there's things that they could do in the, in the summer, in the spring, in the fall, or whatever the case might be. And people come together as volunteers to do and complete or be involved in a project. A project is something that's short term, maybe lasts along for maybe 2 to 3 weeks or whatever the case might be. But it's something that we want to get done, and we want people to become involved. And these projects happen frequently in organizations. They do them in seasonally, Christmas time. In our country, we have Thanksgiving in November, and that's usually a time of celebration of what it is that God has done in our lives over the course of the past few years. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that you can do a project to introduce people to the organization and engage them in meaningful ways to support something that basically is going to enable the organization to grow. Now, programs is another thing. Program is something that basically goes on an annual basis. Most of you have some kinds of programs that take place in your organization year after year after year after year. For example, there are programs that basically generate income. In development, sometimes we have what we call an annual fund, and it's something that we do every year. And every year in the annual fund, we have a goal. This year, it might be $50,000 or 60,000 or 10,000 or whatever the case might be. But that's a program that people get involved in because they want to be a part of something meaningful, much more meaningful than what they could do alone. There are things like examples in this slide that you see in front of you. Examples might include an annual fund, like I just referred to, a prayer partners network. Do you have a prayer partners network? I mean, can you imagine if you had 10,000 or 20,000 people, in Slovakia, who are going to pray for you on a regular basis? Maybe you have a 31-day prayer guide that you make available to them, giving them the opportunity of being able to pray every day for a need unique to the organization. It didn't cost you anything, practically speaking, to be able to put that on to produce something that you can send to people that they can put on the refrigerator door. So today is the 19th. Now, when am I going to look down and say, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do on this particular day, pray for this particular need and so forth. So that didn't cost anything. It's a program. It's not, we're not asking people for money. We're wanting people to become involved. But imagine if we had 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people in your organization, and not necessarily in your organization, but in your country, who basically believe in what it is that you're doing. You're really engaging them, and you're building a relationship. A grandparents association in Christian schools is done oftentimes because everybody wants to see their grandchild. So they bring them out to the grandchildren and see the kids, and that doesn't cost anything, but it provides opportunities to expose people to what it is we're doing and the impact that it's making. And there's a host of other fundraising programs unique to specific donor groups. But the reality is our programs are important. You're going to do them on an annual basis. And it may be something you do in the first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter of the year, whatever the case might be. But these programs really keep things moving as far as your organization is concerned. Now, activities. Most organizations host special events throughout the year. In our area of the world, we obviously do different things that perhaps are unique to your organizations and so forth, but there are holiday celebrations, and we use that celebration opportunity to be able to engage and support what it is that is happening within the community, and ways in which we can involve and become a part of what are the greater community of which we're a part. And then events are pretty, they're very short. I mean, they're short term, or they may actually go an entire year, but the realities are they don't take place on an annual basis in the same way that the other organizations that we've mentioned prior to this session. But sometimes it's an anniversary. If your organization's been around for 25 years, okay, I don't know how big your organization might be, but that's a great time to celebrate. A great time to be reminded of what it is that God has done, what it is that we long for God to do. We celebrate it over a period of time. Those things are extremely valuable. And engaging volunteers with all of these organizations, especially projects, activities, and events, is a really key and significant way to engage people through volunteerism. Now let's look to the next one, the best volunteers. The best volunteers have been exposed and have regularly attended events associated with the organization. In other words, these are the people that you just want to go to first. And in most instances, you don't want to, there are others that become involved in it, but there's obviously people that have been exposed to events and they've been associated with the organization. Some volunteers have also been frequently involved in supporting organizational activities. In other words, they want to support activities by volunteerism. In other words, if you're having an event taking place and let's say it's a banquet and there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be needed in order to be able to facilitate the banquet that basically we want to expend to others or to share with others, that's a good way for them to become involved. And that begins their initial involvement in volunteerism, which is going to be extremely important. I just can't begin to tell you how important it is that we use volunteers and engage volunteers, because that's one way that we can leverage our impact in ministry. And there's a third one, and have been known to make personal sacrifices on behalf of the organization. There are a lot of volunteers that do that. In fact, most of the volunteers, we celebrate volunteerism. And this is something, just a parenthetically, we take, periods of time where we bring all of our volunteers together and we just celebrate together. We just share all the things that God has done, all the wonderful things that have taken place. We get testimonies of people that want to share and have shared their stories. And these become volunteers that are just absolutely uh, essential to our long-term growth and development. So those are the best volunteers. Some volunteer guidelines as we kind of finish up this section, and then we'll take a breakout session where you can discuss it among yourselves. But some of the volunteer guidelines are and really don't minimize this child or this particular session. A volunteer commitment should be limited to 4 to 6 weeks. In other words, you want more people to be involved than just a few key people. You really want to get people involved. And basically, a lot of people are really reluctant, take on a volunteer session. I've had people tell me that, they're walking down the hallway and they see somebody coming and they know it's somebody that's going to ask them to do something, a volunteer. So they run into doors, go into the restrooms, anything to avoid talking to this person because you know what they're coming after, and you really don't necessarily want to be involved in it. But basically, people think that if you're going to be a volunteer, this is going to be a lifetime commitment. Well, it's not going to be a lifetime commitment. We want to do something over a 4 to 6 weeks period. Most people can see that as being realistic. And so we're just going to kind of go with that rather than try to do something that's going to, burn them out at the end and they never want to become involved again. You want them to want more. The more volunteers, the better. No single volunteer should be asked to lead more than one volunteer event in any given year. That's what our recommendations are, and they've been very, very effective in becoming a reality. And then each volunteer coordinator should select or recruit their own team. That's pretty important because people, that do certain things, they just know how to do it well. And rather than just picking somebody because, well, you could do this and you could do this, I mean, you identify people that basically have known to be able to be involved in a volunteer. They do enjoy participating in ways that are unique to the need. And so I recruit people. When I'm recruiting people that I know have the interest and the ability to be able to respond to some of the challenges that we have. And so the final session here in this segment is just the post-mortem. That sounds kind of sick, doesn't it? The post-mortem, you're kind of looking at the person that just died, and now you're going to do an event of kind of, why did he die kind of a situation. That's kind of bleak, isn't it? But immediately after an event, after any event that you do, any event, every event, evaluate the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and threats, if any, of the completed event. Do it immediately after the event. Don't wait for 5 days or 6 days or 2 weeks or a month. Need to have your key team people basically after every event evaluate and assess how it went and what it is that you could do to improve it if you should do it again. And after every event, you might find yourself wishing you had included certain things. The best lessons are often reflected in words like, I wish we would have done that, and a whole bunch of other things. The best, experience that we have is from the rear view mirror of the car as we're driving home. And I can't tell you how many times that my wife and I have, gone after a meeting and we're saying, boy, I wish they would have done that. I wish they could have done that. If they had done that, that would have made a big, big difference. Well, write it down while you know it and basically include it in a folder. So the next time you do it, it's going to be better as it was before. So the post-mortem event is extremely important after everything you do. I have a lot of pastors that basically bring all their key people within the organization, and after the sermon or after, how did we do it? How did this take place? What could we have done that would have been better? We want to continue always being better and engaging people. Some of them will be members of your team. Others might be volunteers that really have something to say that basically is really important and really valuable. So that's what I would recommend that we do. Two things that I really want to focus on this particular program, and perhaps you've heard. I think I tell this story a lot because my mother. I had three older sisters, and then I was the youngest son. And but my mother was very, very conscious of the fact that when somebody did something to you, they should be recognized. And so we all agreed, yeah, that makes sense. But my mother took it to another level totally, and it was probably something that has been going with our children and our great grandchildren now. They're basically doing much the same thing that my mother did many years ago. But the first thing my mother asked me, and this was on the refrigerator door, by the way, it was always measured by a door that we had on the refrigerator. And the first one was when somebody had done something that was very nice to us, somebody gives us a gift or something of that nature. One thing that we would was required by my mother and my sisters as well, is that they were to thank that person verbally. And that's pretty easy to do, thank you. All right. And so that was nice. And the person that received it, received it in a very wonderful way. Well, the next thing that we had to do was we needed to send a note of something or of appreciation. And so that was another, my mother would ask us to, write a little note, and she would put it in the mail for us if we were so young that we couldn't do it. And it would be all in their message, and we'd send the note of the appreciation. It was just a thank you, maybe a card. It could be any number of other things, but that was another. And that was that was easy to do. We could do 1 and 2 very, very easily. But the third one was the one that always caught us, my sisters and I, because the last one was going out of our way to do something extraordinary. In other words, it's not just saying thank you, but really doing something that's really meaningful. And we did all kinds of ways. I mean, I can, I would draw pictures. I would write a poem. I would do, anything. I'd, have a small gift to recognize and express appreciation and involvement for what it is that they were doing. So I'm on a crusade, where everybody should do what my mother did. Okay, and just try it, because I think we lose a lot of not expressions of, we just assume that people are going to appreciate things that we do or have done for them, but oftentimes they don't remember them. But they all remembered. Every single one of them remembered the third one. They recognized the first, they recognized the second, but the third one was the one that everybody remembered. And many would tell their stories year after year about what your child did. Well, it was just something that we really wanted to do. And it really was something that we really wanted to do. So the second one that I want to talk about, and this was with a Christian high school in America, and it was during Christmas, and my wife and I were eating dinner that night, and the phone rang, and I picked up the phone, and I received this message, and it's written here, so you can see it actually. But I said, I called you this evening to say thank you. You have been, and they did it. It wasn't, they had done it well, and I just kind of recorded it, as I listened to it. But it says, you've been very special in financially supporting the ministry of my school. I've attended the school since kindergarten, and I will be graduating in the spring. I will be attending a major university this fall, and had it not been for you and so many others, I might not have had this unique opportunity. I just wanted to say thank you. And I'm sitting there, and my wife's kind of, looking and saying, wow. I mean, she didn't know what I was listening. And she says, what was that all about? And I told her, and it was something that meant so incredibly significant to us. And I think, as I said before, and I probably need to expand the years, but this was one of the most appreciated communication I had ever received. And it was probably 20 years ago, and I never forgot it. And so we have our organizations that do that at the end of the year, at the Christmas season. when you're going to people and just call them and say, hey, listen, I just really want to say, and you're not asking them for anything. You're not asking them for money. You're just saying, hey, listen, you've been a big, significant part of our lives in our ministry. And I just really wanted to call you to say thank you. Uh, you will never, ever know how much that means to people. It really does. It goes beyond anything that I've ever experienced. And I have organizations that every year, they'll bring, if they have a large congregation or a large group of people, they'll go in for a couple of nights and maybe 40 or 50 people and making calls, 10 to 15 or 20 people, just to say thank you. And most people are just caught not really knowing what to say because they're not used to hearing, and they're thinking, well, why don't you give us some money? We're not asking you for money. We're asking you for the involvement and expressions of appreciation of what it is that you've done. So there's a couple of ways to say thank you, and I hope that you kind of remember those as you kind of think forward. Okay, let's talk about mind mapping software. I'm not going to do too much about this, only because we did it yesterday, and I think most of us were involved in that discussion yesterday. But as I shared with you yesterday, and this is going to be repetitive, so I'm not going to take too much time, but mind management has been a way that I've been able to manage my life a little bit more effectively than I would have if I didn't know this. I remember the first time I was exposed to it was at the forum, and it was at the forum, the ELF forum in Chopron, which was at the very beginning of the ELF movement. And I was actually had a 3x5 card in my hand, and that was my notes for that particular presentation. And they were all on a 3x5 card. And there was a time when I could remember just about everything that I ever heard, and I could probably do it without repetitiveness, which I can't do today as I was so effective, as I was more effective in the past. But anyway, this person came up to me and he said, after the meeting, he said, can I see the card that you had in your hand? And it was like four words or something. And those were the words that I really wanted to develop. He says, I think I might have something that might be of value to you. And he introduced to me mind management software because I was doing it by my head and I was missing occasionally things that I really wanted to communicate. And the one way that I could do it better was through mind management. I just highly recommend it. We talked about it yesterday, so I'm not going to spend any time. I'll go over a couple of sheets that you can take a look at as we move forward again, as we talked about it yesterday. But I think most of you were involved in yesterday's presentation. But XMind software is free, as I've already shared with you. There is a modest annual fee should you want to share maps as a PDF document to anyone in the world. And that's what I do a lot, is I'll working with clients or I'm working with individuals. I'll create a mind map. We'll share it back and forth, and that becomes the basic foundation for what it is that we want to do in the future. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind, but really consider it. It's free. Just try it. And I think when you get used to it and you learn all the capabilities that it can provide for you, you're going to be very, very excited, and it's going to really impress you. So this map, is one that we showed yesterday. There were like six particular areas that they wanted to develop. This one was on presenting the information and so forth, and the things that we're going to be doing, and so forth and so on as you look forward to it. But I'm not going to, do that. Let's just kind of move on a little bit more. One of the things that are some other interesting maps. We've already talked about those. So the start planning, this is the things that I think we need to do as we kind of close off this session. Take time after this session to purchase your free version of XMind for another mind management or another mind management software product, and prepare your first map. I would really love for you, if you can send a note here to Greg or to me at the bottom of the sheet here. But if you would just do what I would really like to see is, you do a mind map and send it to either Greg or me, just to, get you started. And I hope that you'll do that. If you'll just take the time to kind of do a map, and I think you'll be eventually convicted of the fact that this is really good. I mean, this is something that's going to enable you to be more effective in accomplishing the things that you want to accomplish. So your first map will be up and running within minutes. That's how long it takes. It doesn't take you don't have to read 3 books about it before you basically plan, what it is that you want to do. Within 5 or 10 minutes, you're going to have a basic plan. And then as you grow as an individual in your ministry, they become much more developed and even more effective when you're really seeking to do things that you obviously want to do. So you will quickly come to the conclusion that strategic organization can easily be done by anyone. And if you can't believe it, just take my word for it and come back and let us know. Greg and I are both very, very anxious to help you in any way that we can. And I think this particular, I spend a lot of time talking about mind mapping because for me, it was a very, very critical moment where I finally began to understand, because I was taking notes, in 3x5 cards. I was, putting them on the back of things that, I had on my piece of paper, all stressed around all my office, and thinking, I got to get that piece. That mind mapping gets it all together and enables me to do what it is that I know I need to do and must do.